Babe was interesting because it really has one stat.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which and when I first read that, I was like, how can this work? It doesn't seem reasonable or like a good idea. And I read it more. I was like, okay, my skepticism is lifted. This is actually a pretty cunning idea. I think I like it.
Yeah, thank you. I will say that, to give credit where it was due, that Trollbay was influenced by a game in 1997 by Lester Smith called Zero. And that's the first time I saw a game where a character had one number and you either had to roll over or under. Mm. And I said, I'm gonna remember that, and I did. And so, credit to Lester for actually doing it the first time. But the thing with Trollbabe is that, unlike Zero, which has a fatigue and injury track, so that you count down your fatigue from this end, and you count down your injuries from that end. If either one hits its own bottom, you go down. Mm-hmm. But if they cross, you also go down, which is a pretty good little system for that kind of thing, fatigue and injury. I actually think it's very clever, but Trollbabe has no numerical tracker of damage. In fact, the Trollbabe can be injured infinitely, as long as she doesn't become incapacitated through a reroll. So that's where you get the character like with arrows sticking out of her and still going and all that kind of stuff. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We had
which I had a chance to play it, and now I'm thinking I really just need to run it for a group at some point.
I really hope you do. There's I've been playing it at the what's called Spielenshuis, the playhouse for role playing and other games here in Norrköping, which is my home. And Spielenshuis is this great place, and Trollbabe has kind of caught on. We just ran another session, and the reason I mention it is because it was one of those times when a Trollbabe did basically get quite bloody through the course of the adventure, taking multiple injuries. And so she was looking quite rugged, but you could tell the player was kind of like, well, yes, I know it means that I start here on the reroll sequence. I start a little lower. But I can do this. So the original form of Trollbabe did have a couple of other things that caused trouble with that. And it wasn't until I said, I said, okay, we're not changing any of the rules. You don't have to take penalties if you're wounded. I think I had something about some wretched penalty where you actually had to change the number, and it was just a terrible idea. And this, to just use the rules that you have already, turned out to be a much better idea. A lot of people in Trollbabe wiggle their number a bit, because it's really kind of like experimenting, right? It's a new instrument, so you kind of like playing with the toggle a little bit, session by session, and then you hit upon it. You're like, okay, I like her this good relative to that good in fighting and magic. I like her that way, and if I change it, I can, but we're going to do this for a while. This is how we're going to see her for a while. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Instead of increasing your abilities, you wiggle it to where you like them the best. That stuck with me. And I found myself looking at, I just redid my version of Champions Now, it's called. And I found it kind of interesting to take that same logic, instead of just thinking of more points, because it's a very point-building game, right? And you get more points. It actually was one of the very first to do that. And so everyone kind of thinks the hero is getting more and more and more and more and more powerful. And yet, for a variety of reasons, it actually works better to think of the experience system as wiggling the character into the form that the hero will take for the duration. Just like a hero being introduced for the first time. Comic book superheroes didn't enter the comics the way we know and love them.
Oh, yeah.
None of them. And so, their powers were different or very undefined, and they were written often in a context of problems and things that weren't really where the character eventually went. And I find that it's better to think of the lower point value that you start with in champions not as low power relative to later high power, but as vagueness relative to specificity that you only discover through use.
So you're starting off with a block of clay and sort of sculpting something.
Right. And it's a little deceptive because it looks as though you're getting more points. And I guess
Huh.
So it's a little deceptive because you are getting more points, and if you wanted to, you could just keep making the energy blast more and more and more and more powerful if you wanted to. But if you go back to the original texts, the authors are very clear, and it matches my experience with the game, which is really extensive, that it works better to sophisticate, specify, interconnect, and even redefine certain pieces and parts of your character as you go through until now you're like, okay, this is how I like them for a fairly substantial period now.
Now that I think of it, that is kind of how I introduce games to players. So it's like, how about we just get the very basics down?
Right.
Don't even finish your character. Just have some concept of them down. Because you aren't necessarily going to know what direction you want to go with them. Let's just sort of start. Don't worry about having all the skills, all their everything filled out.
Yeah. It's not a bad idea. It's really not a bad idea at all. There's even some options in some games. One of the games that was written for Glorantha has been through several different designs called Hero Quest. One of those designs was actually, the earlier ones had a really interesting idea, which was, listen, just pick your keywords. And when you hit something that you want to do during play that seems right for your character, give it a name and make it an ability. Instead of starting from the beginning and saying, okay, you get 10 abilities, under 3 keywords, pick them. No, instead you say, okay, start with a keyword so we at least know what your dude looks like and kind of where they're coming from. But isn't that like encountering a character in a story? You just get your first impression and then you see them do stuff, right? And so I've actually never played Hero Quest that way, which may be a failing on my part. It may actually be, and I played a lot of Hero Quest, it may actually be a bit of a failing on my part not to ever have really picked up that character creation option seriously and saying, this is a good idea. Let's do that.
It's sort of what I do with Fate, because Fate, you start off with way too many aspects and things like that. I'm like,
agreed. A lot of Fate is, in general, I find to be front-loaded. I find a lot of Fate as a design to be front-loaded. Once you've written down everything and gotten ready to play, there's really not much else to discover. Yeah. That's just my view. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. I love the system, but I kind of wish it was like, start off with 1 or 2 aspects.
Right.
You go through things and sort of add more later. I always find myself hacking it a lot, which I really meant to be hacked anyway. So.
Have you, are you familiar with one of the Fate core games called Edragor by Alan Turner?
I have heard of it, but I've never actually taken a look at it. It was one of those ones that's kind of like, this looks cool. Maybe I'll pick it up at some point.
Yeah, Alan and I were actually professors at DePaul University at the same time, and knew each other there. And we both took our games through our Kickstarters, our first Kickstarters, almost simultaneously. The reason I bring it up is because now that it's a really dynamic setting. And very dynamic characters, and unlike many Fate games, permanent and dreadful change to your character is on the table. He actually had to kind of hack the damage and destruction rules so that you couldn't just dodge out of it with fate points. No, your character was gonna get maimed, and your character was gonna to become half demonic, and no, you're not getting out of that shit. And so I've been looking it over because for some reason I've just been kind of hyped on weird settings lately and looking through my games for the weirdest settings. And Edragor's pretty up there. And I've been going through it and again, just found myself again, just like you said, I don't want to have 20 aspects when I start. And then you just sort of clicked it for me. And I was like, you know what? I am going to play Edragor and I'm going to start different. We're gonna find out what their aspect of becoming is a couple sessions in. You know, that's what we're going to do as the development system
Yeah.
is fill in stuff that we haven't learned yet, so now we can see it happen. You know, now that you've seen your guy.
Character problems are interesting too.
Yeah, well, you actually make decisions during play a lot, right? I mean, how many times have I gone into play saying, "All right, I'm going to play my Mystic Street Rogue."
Mm-hmm.
For this semi-Shadowrun, semi-elfy, semi-punky urban game. So I'm playing my Mystic Street Rogue. I mean, stop me. I almost told you all about that character. And so...
all you need.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't there like, you know, there's a crack in the wall that you can direct people to when they start telling you about their character, and you promise them somebody is on the other side listening. But in the case of this, I'm saying I got that, but why not? I mean, I know for a fact, and I bring this up for a reason, that a great deal of her characterization, priorities, and values I only figured out in adversity during play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's how it should be, in my opinion.
And then why not fill in the blank? You know,
it's a lot more fun.
Yeah, I mean, and character goal. I mean, games with an explicitly stated character goal. Perfectly good example. The more I think about it, the dumber it is to put the goal down first. Play a session. Play a session. Now tell me, you've seen NPCs, you've seen them interact, you've seen the other player characters, you've seen how the setting kind of feels now.
Yeah.
Now what
exactly.
do you want? And so now your character could have wanted this from the start, but we didn't know that. Now we can. So anyway, I don't know. It's very, very thought-provoking. I'm actually thinking a lot about this now for, you know, for a couple of the games. I'm looking back on my games. I noticed that my games are exceptionally silent on character goal.
Yeah.
They're also,
in a game.
And they're also very customizey. You know, you look at what you've got and you say, well, now when we look at them again, meet the character again, this is what we notice that's different now. You know, so we just lost those things. You rewrote those things. In Sorcerer, after you resolve a kicker, this was before the word arc even existed as a pop culture thing, so I called it a kicker. When you resolve the kicker, you are allowed to rewrite all your descriptors. Everything. Stamina, will, lore, flaw, price, not flaw. Everything. You're able to rewrite those, and the idea is that story's done. Your character was like that for that story. Now what are they like? So it's and so like there wasn't a progression. There wasn't like the descriptors you're allowed to use for the beginning, and then the descriptors you can turn them into, and you know there wasn't a progression of descriptors at all. So cool. All right. Well, I'm gonna go if that's cool.
All right. Hopefully this video works.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah, I enjoyed talking with you. So
you too. Totally, it was a great combo.
Yeah, see you later.
You too.